Vertigo Nation, coming up in this episode, I'm going to be talking to you about rejection sensitive dysphoria. What is it? Stay tuned and find out. This is Vertigo, the podcast that will make your head spin.
From the mind of Sean McDowell, this is Vertigo, the podcast that will make your head spin.
Vertigo Nation, welcome back to another episode. Thank you for joining me. This is your host, Sean. I am definitely excited to be here. I've got a topic prepared for us this week that I am going to be talking about. But before I begin, if you are not part of the Vertigo Nation, I want you to take a quick second right now, hit the subscribe button, and join all the listeners who come back week after week to knowing that this is the podcast that will make your head spin. So do that. Do it now. Thank you. And for all of the Vertigo Nation, thank you for joining me each week as I deliver these podcasts to you. And definitely, like I said, I've got some exciting topics that I want to dive into. But before I get to the main one, I thought talk a little bit about what's on my playlist this week. Got to open it up with a little bit of fun. And I think this one is going to throw some people for a loop because this week's playlist, and this is why I'm starting out with the playlist, this week's playlist has been interesting, to say the least, even from my standpoint, I got to say. So I'm just going to dive right into it. My playlist has been a little bit off the charts this week. And it's been mainly, ready for this? The Cure, The Cult, and Depeche Mode. So I said it was going to throw everybody for a loop, and I'm thinking that if you've been listening for any length of time, you know that those are definitely... Now, I, in fairness, have said that I am a music fan across the board. I love music, always have. I can tell you... I remember the first cassette that I ever bought. I'm not sure if I want to go out and talk about what it is just yet. No, I'm just kidding. I'll let you know what it was. The very first cassette that I ever bought. Now, I don't remember how old I was because, again, the whole Swiss cheese brain thing that I talked about last week. But I do remember the first cassette that I ever had. I remember the first two cassettes, actually. The first one was The Culture Club with Karma Chameleon. Karma, chameleon. You come and go, right? Who doesn't know that song? Who doesn't love that song? And then I think the next one, and I could be wrong on this, but I think it was Faith by George Michael. Or George Michael. I don't know. Is there an S on his name? I'm going to have to look that up now because I just confused myself. George Michael. Or is it Michaels? We're going to have to look that up. I'll do that before the end of the show. But that was the second cassette that I remember purchasing. Now, prior to that, I remember I was always fascinated by the artwork and such. My dad had an incredible record collection. And I can assure you that... that when I was a kid, I would lay there on the floor and just look at all of his records and the artwork. And he also, had a pretty eclectic musical taste. So I do remember that too. But I loved looking at all the records and looking at the artwork, reading through all the lyrics. Always loved that. And so I actually have to say that now with the dawn of MP3s and, digital media, it's kind of a bummer, man, that you don't get to... I mean, even with CDs and even cassettes. I remember getting cassettes as a kid, and you could, at least, like, the cassettes had those inlets, like those fold-outs, and you could fold it out and still see at least the artwork, even though it was a smaller scale, obviously, than a record. But I also remember compact discs, right? Came with those booklets. It's like you miss that part of... At least I do. I miss that part, because to me, that was almost... as enjoyable as the music itself. Like, there was nothing better than listening to your favorite artist or that new single that just came out Yeah, I still probably need to contact my speech teacher. But I remember when the why can't I say that off the cuff? The I want to say signal instead of single, and it's not. It's a signal, and it's not a signal. This is a signal, though, that my mind is warped. But, and who wouldn't love, like, looking through the CD booklets and stuff? At least I did. So, but I do remember George Michael Faith and the Culture Club were, like, the first two cassettes that I owned. And so where was I going with that? I don't know. But anyway, my music taste is all over the place, is my point. And so what had happened is I was in the car, just listen. I needed something different. You ever have that happen, right? I just feel like I'm always listening to, I feel like, the same kind of playlist, right? I've got my jam band playlist, which really is largely the Grateful Dead. I think there's Mo in there, right? But there's the whole jam band playlist that I have. And then I have my hip hop stuff that I like, which is really Wu-Tang, heavy, but also, some of those 90s and 2000s rap artists, Jay-Z, Fat Joe, that kind of vibe. And then, I've got my metal, which is, absolutely my favorite, probably the one I play the shit out of the most, Ozzy Osbourne, Black Sabbath, Metallica, Slayer. I love the Big Four, thrash, Pantera. I've always going to have a special place in my heart for the boys from Pantera, man. So, and then I feel like I wear that stuff out. And then I might, then of course I've got my bluegrass stuff, which kind of goes along with the jam band stuff, Billy Strings and Yonder Mountain and whatever. But anyway, I just was looking for something completely different. Well, Gia has been into listening to the station, the iHeart 80s, on her iPad. And a Cure song came on, Love Song. And I love The Cure. I always have loved The Cure. They're one of those bands that just, for me, there isn't a song that can come on by The Cure that, one, you don't know it's The Cure, but two, I'm like, gosh, that's such a great song. And so around October, I think it was. Yes, it was, because my grandson was born on Halloween. So right around that time, The Cure had released a new album, and I was giving it a listen. And then fast forward to now, I haven't really listened to The Cure that much since then. So anyway, Gia's listening to iHeart 80s. This is the ADHD part of the show where I get to tell you all the gory details that go on through my mind, but before I really get to the point. Although you're sitting on the other end going, the fuck is he talking about? That's why this is the podcast that makes your head spin. Is your head spinning? If not, let's continue. So I was listening to Gia's, so fast forward, right? Gia's listening to iHeart 80s. The Cure comes on. Boom. I'm listening to The Cure. Before I know it, I'm in a pool way at the deep end, and I'm listening to The Cure. And then from The Cure, because, all of these wonderful music apps that we have nowadays give us suggested artists, and that's incredible, right? So Depeche Mode was in there. And then on my own, I went to The Cult. The Cult was not attached to Depeche Mode or The Cure, but I just threw that in there for a little flavor because I got to have the hard rock. I guess that's the one thing I noticed at the end. I could be, knee deep in the hip hop, but I still need some hard rock thrown in there or whatever. So anyway, that's where The Cult came in. But I've been listening to The Cult, The Cure, and Depeche Mode. And I got to say that in my mind, Depeche Mode, for one, has got to be one of the most underrated bands, at least in the States. I think they're huge in the UK. They're a British band, so I think they are pretty big over in the UK. But as far as synth pop goes, which I'm not really a huge fan of, ironically, but I do love some Depeche Mode. And then, of course, The Cure, which I don't even really know what The Cure is a genre of all their own. The Cure is just The Cure. They're definitely, a rock band for sure, but they've got that little bit of a punkish thing to them, especially their early albums. And then they've also got a little bit of that emo sense to them, even though I don't think that was really a term that was around in the 80s and 90s when they were popular, or at their peak at least. Maybe it was. And then So a little bit of punk rock in there, early punk rock, not like the skate punk rock like No Effects and shit that we know as punk rock now, but definitely not hardcore, but like the early British, like, The Clash, Sex Pistols, like that early kind of punk music. And then what's the other? They're not emo. There's another thing. Goth. They're very gothic, right? Which I never really understood that either. Although I did have friends in high school who were definitely into the goth, like rock music scene, and wore the black and with the bright red lipstick, but the pale kind of face. And I did see that look was kind of back again. I don't know. Maybe it was the early 2000s. It wasn't real recent, but recent enough. But yeah, so that's what's on my playlist. And always would love to hear what's on yours, so don't be afraid to drop a comment. Or if you even just want to converse about, the playlist or songs that you enjoy, from those bands, always willing to listen. So drop me some comments. And yeah, would love to hear it. I also want to revisit the whole Hulk Hogan thing, because I obviously had done the podcast, The End of an Era, which dropped last week. If anybody has not listened to that podcast, it's out. I talk about Ozzy Osbourne's passing, and I talk about Hulk Hogan's passing. And the title of the pod is End of an Era, because you had these two huge icons. Obviously, Ozzy Osbourne since the 70s, right? Black Sabbath kind of coined the term of heavy metal. That wasn't really a thing until Black Sabbath until Black Sabbath did come along. They didn't kind of come along. They did come along. One of the things I've been trying to do is pay attention to my speech when I'm doing these podcasts. When I listen back and I'm like, oh, I say that phrase too much or whatnot. So I'm trying to be better about, I find in my speech I can be indecisive. Like I say they kind of did this. No, they did it, whatever. So yeah, Ozzy Osbourne, definitely a pioneer of heavy metal music. And I gave him a huge shout out. Of course, Ozzy, man, still kind of reeling over that, I have to be honest. I don't know. He was just he introduced me. So talking about my first cassettes, I guess this fits here. When I first heard Ozzy Osbourne, I heard him as a solo artist first, and then from learning who he was, then went back and discovered Black Sabbath. So I kind of discovered Ozzy in a reverse order. I discovered Ozzy's solo stuff first, and really late. Like, of course I knew from, my dad was a rock fan, so he would always listen into, whatever rock station at the time. And I, of course, had heard, I Don't Know, or Mr. Crowley, or some of those early hits that Ozzy had in the early 80s, I think 81, 82, like early on, right? And so I knew who he was, but I didn't really discover Ozzy until an album called No Rest for the Wicked came out, which I think was 88. And y'all can double check me on that, but I'm pretty sure No Rest for the Wicked came out in 1988. It was also the very first time that he had a very young guitarist with him by the name of Zakk Wylde, who, if anybody's a rock metal fan, I'm sure you know who Zakk Wylde is. And that was my introduction to Ozzy was Zakk Wylde. And to this day, I am a huge Zakk Wylde fan. And I just love his playing. And I love anything that he's put out between Ozzy and Black Label Society, and his solo stuff as well. Just love Zakk Wylde. So that was my introduction to Ozzy. Still reeling a little bit over Ozzy's passing, to be honest with you. And so still just kind of that still kind of, still was on a kick earlier in the week where I was still listening to some of Ozzy's, music. But Hulk Hogan also passed. And I understand that Hulk Hogan is a controversial figure. And this is hard. So this kind of brings up this conversation of, do you appreciate a celebrity for the music and the art that they've produced? Or do you really have to take in consideration the whole character? And so for me, in regards to Hulk Hogan, when I was talking about how he'll be missed, I was really talking about being a fan of Hulk Hogan and Hulkamania, because I grew up in that era and I could identify with that. I also know that Hulk Hogan, as a human being, as Terry Bollea, who he is in real life, was pretty controversial. He had made some pretty racist comments, and had some, I guess, not so great things come out about him in the media, and I understand that. And it doesn't take away from the fact of what he did as Hulk Hogan in the 80s. So it's very hard. So do I support Hulk Hogan? I support who I knew as Hulk Hogan as a kid in the 80s. Do I support Terry Bollea? I don't know, because I don't know Terry Bollea. I know what the media has said about Terry Bollea, and I don't necessarily agree with all of those things. But at the same time, I never met him personally, and so I can't really draw a direct line on would I support Terry Bollea. Not from what I've heard, but again, we only get sound bites, so it makes it really difficult. Now, those sound bites I think are important, but I don't know that they speak to the entire character. And here's why. I know that if somebody took sound bites of me at certain times in my life, I have not always been the most pleasant person and have not always said the most pleasant things. And I think that people have a right to be able to have opinions that change over time. So some of my opinions that I had when I was, a younger person, and now at nearing 50 years old, looking back at, I would probably tell that younger version of myself, like, you got to toe a line, or you better watch your step, or you might want to watch what you say, because views do change. So I don't know, man. So that's kind of, I'm not trying to, wiggle or worm my way out of anything. He definitely was a controversial figure. I'm going to let you all decide. But it is really hard. We see all these characters fall from graces, and it's kind of tough. Diddy is probably one of the most current right now, facing the sex trafficking allegations that he's faced. And, does that mean that you don't respect the art that he put out? I mean, I think that's a personal choice. I don't know. I personally don't like his music, so that's kind of a bad choice for me, I think. To try, same with R. Kelly. I have a hard time forming an opinion because I don't like R. Kelly's music as it is. So I already have an opinion of his music, and I don't like it. And so it makes it really easy to say I don't like, R. Kelly, and therefore, he's whatever for doing what he did, a scumbag or whatever, whatever negative term you want to throw in there. I definitely don't condone it. 100% don't condone it. I think, that what he did was 100% wrong. And I think that he faced his consequences, right? He had to go to court. He's living in prison now. Like, that's what happens when you do that kind of shit. So I don't know. I'll let you all decide on that on your own. I just want to be clear that when I was talking about Hulk Hogan, because I got a couple of comments about it, like, and nothing really negative, nothing really crazy, nothing that, whatever. Just people asking me what my opinion was of, him in the media and the recent kind of like controversy that came up about him. And I'm like, yeah, I'll address it on the pod, but I don't really have an opinion about it, I guess. Because again, I feel like I don't know him personally, I don't know any celebrity personally. So it makes it really hard to judge, I guess, for me. I'm just speaking on that. But I also don't condone or support. So moving on from that. I think this is a good time to get into the topic. Let's do it. So I want to talk a little bit. As you all know, I cover a lot around ADHD on the program. And that is partly because it is humorous to me, I guess, a little bit on how my brain works. I have found some humor in that. I also have found some comfort in it because for the longest time I was and have been misdiagnosed, and I'm learning that is such a huge thing in ADHD. And, so a lot of the show does kind of encompass that. But the interesting thing is I had done a couple of episodes now. I did an episode on conflict And what did I call it? I don't remember what I called it, but just that, me keeping it on the I personally have trouble sometimes with conflict. And I wish that meant, now here's the caveat to that. It doesn't matter. Go back and listen to it. But anyway, yeah, there was this whole podcast that I did about conflict and whatnot. So anyway, it was then put on my radar, this thing called RSD. So R, Robert, S, Sam, D, David, RSD. Never had I heard of this before, but I found it interesting to kind of go down the rabbit hole. And so I wanted to talk about this today because I wonder how many people, because it is, first of all, RSD is Rejection Sensitive Dysphoria. No. I said that completely wrong. Scratch that, right? Rejection, not reaction. Rejection Sensitive Dysphoria. I'm making up my own disorders now. I mean, why not? Rejection Sensitive Dysphoria. That's what RSD is. And the reason that I feel so compelled to talk about this is because I think that this is something that there are many of us who have either at one point in our life kind of battled, and maybe we've gotten through it, or maybe can still, still battle with it a little bit. Now, I don't know anybody who can handle rejection well, right? Rejection is one of those things where you could be the emotionally toughest SOB on the planet, but I think that rejection gets to us all in some way or another. Now, RSD, Rejection Sensitive Dysphoria, is obviously a little bit more involved than just being a little irked that maybe somebody rejected you, right? What RSD is extreme emotional sensitivity and pain triggered by the perception. Now that's the important word as I talk about this, okay? Perception. Because RSD doesn't mean factually that somebody is rejecting us, because then it would be legitimate to have feelings of rejection. So in the scenario, right, if we are rejected by somebody, legitimately rejected, okay, we ask them out, they say no, right? That's rejection. Then, of course, there's going to be an emotional response to that. RSD is different, though, okay? Rejection Sensitive Dysphoria, all right, is triggered by the perception that a person has been rejected or criticized by important people in their life. It may also be triggered by a sense of failing or falling short of meeting your own standards, perfectionism. Okay? So that's why I found this interesting. Now, before I go down too much about this, I also wanted to understand what dysphoria was, because that's not a term or a word that I use very much in my vocabulary. So I wasn't really sure what dysphoria is. And what I found was, and let me cite this for you, because I did make sure that I was getting some, good information and not just Reddit, Not that there's nothing wrong with getting opinions off Reddit, but I like to have a little bit of science back. So I got this from the clevelandclinic.org, okay, clevelandclinic.org. And dysphoria is Greek for difficult to bear, all right? Now, the other thing is this isn't a mental health disorder that is diagnosed by a doctor or psychiatrist or even a counselor for that matter. It is just kind of this secondary thing that happens. Now, I've got this online magazine that I do read called Attitude, ADDITUDE mag, Attitude, ADDITUDE mag.com, Attitude. And I just find that it's got some really helpful articles, and it does kind of help break things down and explain things. And I found this RSD also in that magazine. And so what I like about it is it talks about how there are certain things that are attached to ADHD. Now, here's one of the things that I learned about ADHD. ADHD impacts the emotional part of our brains. Now, don't ask me for the technical term of what that is. Just trust me. You can look it up and you can find it. But the emotional center of our brain is what's impacted most by ADHD. They also know that ADHD is hugely genetic. Okay? And now, so the old stereotype of that kid in the corner just can't sit still, and the argument of, well, boys will be boys, or is that ADHD, right? ADHD is genetic. It's impacted. They can do brain scans of the brain, and they can actually see a difference in an ADHD brain versus a traditional or, healthy. Now, when you take that ADHD brain and then add a little salt and pepper of trauma, boy, you're off to the races. And that often is what brings on the rejection sensitive dysphoria, right? Is you've got the ADHD already, and then you salt and pepper some trauma in there, and boom, you got this beautiful flower of dysphoria. Great, right? So I want to just go out. So I want to quote the magazine again, Attitude, AttitudeMag.com. That's ADD. Oh, I'm not going to spell it again. I spelled it 3 times. You can figure it out. All right. It's not that people with attention deficit disorder are wimps or weak. It's that the emotional response hurts them more than it does people without the condition. No one likes to be rejected, criticized, or fail, right? We just talked about that. There are times, again, legitimately, when we've come up short, or, we failed at a project, we've disappointed somebody, maybe our boss, right? It's not always intimate relationships. I feel like this impacts me at work almost more than anything else, because I hate letting people down, especially my boss, right? You got to look good in front of your boss. And so, but the emotional response hurts so much that it it does. It takes over the ability to think things through logically. The emotional toll takes over. And so that emotional response takes over because ADHD is already impacting that part of the brain. It's already there. ADHD is very much an emotional disorder. Okay. And then you add in this RSD, and it's like, so then you feel like just, I don't even know how to make it feel, I guess I've experienced this, and I think it's just, for me, it's like either very intense sadness, a little bit of anxiety. Of course, everything kind of ends up being anxiety in one way or another, at least for me. But it's just this incredibly heavy feeling, and then it's because it's perceived, remember. So let me give you a great example, because this just happened. All right. So, and I am going to use Minna, my spouse, as in the example, and this legitimately just happened. We were sitting down. I get home late, from work. I don't get home until after 7 o'clock, Monday through Friday. I'm not home until after 7. So we don't eat dinner, because one of the things that I love is we always eat dinner together. And I love that. So we don't eat until like 7:30, sometimes 8 o'clock at night, because of my work schedule. And so this particular night, we had gotten done eating, and we were just sitting, bullshitting, conversing at the table. And I had gotten up to go take care of Gia. Gia's got meds at various times, right? So I had gotten up and gone to take care of Gia. And on my way back, I just sat down at the table, and we started chatting again. Well, then Min says to me, very plainly, like no judgment, no argument, like we were just having a general conversation. And she says, well, I guess I'm going to get up and do the dishes because they're still in the sink. Okay. So my mind right, goes automatically to the shortcomings. They're still in the sink. And so for what happens is, for me, is like this emotion kicks in of intense guilt or failure. Like, I should have done the dishes. Right now, she didn't say, the sentence was not, since you didn't do the dishes, I'm going to have to now get up and do them. That was not the conversation. That is not what was said at all. It was a very simple, I'm going to do the dishes, they're still in the sink. But my mind hyper fixated on the part of the sentence that was, they're still in the sink. Like somehow it was my fault that those dishes were still in the sink. And so then I make some snide remark like, yeah, I guess I could have done them when I got up to do Gia. And it was like, and her response was like, whoa, I wasn't asking for you to do them or telling you that you didn't do them or shaming you for not doing them. I'm just saying that they're still in the sink and they need to be done. So I'm going to get up and do them. And so I started to think about how many arguments have I started because of those strong emotional feelings coming up, right? And I'm being 100% honest. There was no inflection of tone in Min's voice, nothing that directed, that made that comment sound like it was directed at me negatively. There was nothing. It was just a very matter-of-fact statement like, boom, I'm going to go do this. And that is RSD, because the emotional part like takes over even more than logic. Like I can sit here logically now and go through and say to you all listeners, right? There was no inflection in tone. There was no mood. There was no glance. There was no like, you son of a bitch. There was nothing in there that said you should have done the dishes. But that's how I took it. And that is very much what RSD is it's those intense emotional feelings that take over, and give us this perception that we have fallen short and that we didn't do something, we didn't stick to our end of the deal or whatever, right? And so then, it's kind of like off to the races because there's an emotional response that happens from that, right? And the crazy thing is it can imitate a full mood disorder, right? I mean, because the mood can change so suddenly. In that instance, right? We're sitting at the table, we're enjoying time together, we were just conversing about our day, nothing, and then one statement, I'm going to do the dishes because they're still in the sink. Boom, it's like a complete shift in Sean all of a sudden. Now I'm hurt, and because I'm hurt, what does Sean show most when he's hurt? He's very good at showing anger. Now, in this case, nothing, I think I did make a like, oh, sorry. Like I did make a, like a snide, like sorry or something like that. I did. And, but I also appreciate that it didn't lead to an argument or anything like that because I was able to reel it back in because she said, whoa, it's not a big deal, right? But it just goes to show you how that looks, right? And so it was kind of interesting, I guess, that this term kind of came to me because, again, it wasn't anything that I was necessarily looking for, but I have been somebody who has felt rejection in my life often. And now I'm beginning to realize that I think that it's not true rejection as much as it's perceived rejection. To take it off of men, because poor men, I'm not trying to put any more stress on men, but I remember even when I worked in the union, when I was in the painters and tapers union, I had a foreman who loved dearly. So Wayne, shout out to you, man. You were one of the most incredible guys I got to work with in the union. He really was just a stand-up dude. He really was. And think about you still, Wayne. If you do happen to listen to this, man, I'm still thinking about you and Jared often, man. So I hope you guys are doing well. But one of the things that he used to say to me is, man, you got a guilty conscience, don't you? You'll apologize for something you didn't even steal, right? And this would be a running joke, because I was always the one like, oh, sorry, apologizing for everybody else's shortcomings. Sorry about that. Sorry, I should have done that. Sorry. Two things that I was told. One, you should never should on yourself, right? Because you're just guilting yourself. And two, like, yeah, what am I saying sorry for? And not only, it's like, I'm saying sorry for everything and I didn't even do it, I'm apologizing for other people's shortcomings, and what kind of bullshit is that, right? And so, this is definitely something that I've been clued into and kind of taking a little bit notice to. And I'm starting to realize that, like, I have perceived this to be true, but it's not true, right? And so I guess I also want to say that part of the therapy and learning about ADHD and learning about this is that I am now able to kind of sit back a little bit and be like, oh, wait a minute. This is just perceived rejection. This isn't really rejection. And then I can handle that a little bit better or whatever, So I just wanted to share that because I wonder how many of us, suffer from this. I think it's something that is real. I think it's something that is legitimate. And even though it's not necessarily a diagnosis, the fact that, we see these trends, I think is important to clue into. So if any of you out there have your own stories like that, I would love to hear them. And you don't necessarily even need to be a guest on the show to share it. Like I said, just comment, if you want to hit me up, vertigopod@gmail.com. You can certainly do that. Yeah, you can message me on Facebook and whatnot. I know I haven't posted much on Facebook. We've talked about that every episode, so I'm not going to do it again on this episode. You know the drill. But, I'm there, but I'm not there, I guess. So if you want to though have a conversation, you can always message me. And, I would love to have some of these conversations. And you can always come on the show and we can always talk about it across the table as well. But, so yeah, moving on. So RSD, if you're not, if you've never heard of it before, but you're somebody who has kind of suffered with those, rejections or perceived rejections, shortcomings, feeling like you failed, Google it, RSD, Rejection Sensitive Dysphoria, right? Rejection Sensitive Dysphoria, RSD. Like I said, if you're an ADHDer like myself, then you may already know about it, or maybe not. It's definitely something to look at, though. So with that, I want to wrap up on kind of a fun note. So the other day, I decided I was going to take Indy, which is my black lab, and Gia, my daughter, and we were going to go for a ride. Min was busy. She was off, doing some stuff, and I just wanted to get the hell out of the house for a little while. So we got in the car, and we just took a ride. And I had my GPS going. We were going to head up to Sackett's Harbor, right? Which, from Pulaski, you just got on Route 3, man, and you just go. And it's really not that big of a deal. But here's the thing. For me, I start not paying attention because and that probably sounds dangerous as I'm driving. I also want to preface by saying I've never been in an accident, so I pay attention when it counts. But no, so, I just check out sometimes. You get driving and it's like, oh shit, I passed Sackett's Harbor like 20 minutes ago. What the fuck am I thinking, right? So I keep my GPS on. But what I started to realize was when the GPS tells me to turn right or tells me to turn left, I somehow always want to do the opposite, right? And for the longest time, and my wife would tell, Min is infamous for saying this too, and if anybody comes into Air for a massage and you're seeing Minna, you can ask her about this. I will not be offended. We'll go for a ride, and she'll be like, Hun, you got to turn left. You got to turn left. As I'm turning right, Hun, you got to turn left. Your other left, Sean. You got to take the other left. And I'm like, oh, fuck, and then it's too late. Now I got to find a spot to turn around and whatnot. So my whole life, and there's been this joke. I did 23andMe, oh, gosh, years ago now, but I did 23andMe. And my DNA hit did come back with a little Neanderthal in there. So I got a little Neanderthal in there. So there's been this common joke because I think within 23andMe, it had made the comment that if you're bad with directions and whatnot, it can be because you have this Neanderthal DNA. So there's always been this joke between Min and I at least, that, I'm not good with direction because I'm a Neanderthal, right? But I just found this out too, kind of attaching with the RSD and all that bullshit. I just found out that ADHDers have a hard time differentiating their left and their right. So I was like, phew, I'm not like, I don't know what the word is that you can use anymore. I'm not, I don't know. The word that wants to come to my mind, and I'm just going to apologize out there right now, is retarded. But I'm not retarded. I actually do know my left from my right. And I do. But in those moments where we're just going and I'm not thinking really about anything, like if you said raise your right hand, I'm going to raise my right hand. And I think 9 times out of 10, I'm going to get it right. Okay? I'm going to raise my right hand 9 times out of 10. There's going to be that one time that you catch me. I get it. But I know my right from my left. However, I also realized, though, that when I started boxing, right, I was going to the Watertown Boxing Club, and no one had ever picked up on this before until I went to I had boxed on and off, like in different gyms and whatnot, whatever. So I got to the actual Watertown Boxing Club, and I was so excited joining the Watertown Boxing Club. And I remember working with the coach, and he's like, "Are you right-handed or left-handed?" And I'm like, "I'm right-handed." He goes, "Well, why are you lining yourself up like you're going to fight southpaw?" I had been boxing, shadow boxing, hitting the heavy bags, working with coaches too. Like this wasn't just did it on my own. And no one ever asked me before if I was right or left-handed, because I guess that everybody just assumed, coaching-wise, that I was left-handed, because I would always get in my stance and I would be in a southpaw stance. And I never thought about it, that I'm right-hand dominant, right? Now, I'd never been, in a sanctioned match, professional. So, I mean, I guess we just always thought that I was a southpaw. And it wasn't until all those years later, I joined the Watertown Boxing Club and had been training and doing this thing, right? Sparring, always sparred, whatever. And no one ever made the comment of, "You're fighting left-handed." Until somebody in Watertown said, "You're fighting left-handed." And I went, "No shit, I've been doing that for 10 years now." So, ADHD brain, I guess, man. You just don't think about it, I guess. I don't know. Kind of weird, man. Kind of weird. But I am happy to know that it is just part of me and that there is nothing really, really wrong. I didn't, I do know my right from my left, except in those moments when I don't, I guess. So, yeah, just a little bit of fun there. So, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Vertigo. I hope that you found this episode interesting. Again, I'm going to remind you to hit the subscribe button. Please come back, show some support, throw some love behind Vertigo. I will be having guests again. This isn't going to just be a solo podcast forever. I will be scheduling guests. However, it is summertime, and I've got to be honest, I'm enjoying my summer. This is a hobby. I don't get paid to do this, at least not yet, not now. Maybe that opportunity will come at some point. I'm always willing to keep those doors open. However, it's hard in the summertime to link up with people. People are doing their thing, man, so the barbecues and the whatnot is going on. But I do have people who have emailed me. I do have people who are interested, and I do have people who are going to be coming in. So you will hear guests. If your thing is you like hearing the conversations with guests, I got you, and there will be guests coming back. And for those who are enjoying the solo episodes and are hanging in there and listening, I appreciate you as well. And I promise you, Vertigo isn't going anywhere. And whether it's me or me and another, you will have Vertigo week to week to look forward to. So thank you for all the support. I can't say that enough. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button, and I promise to keep delivering the content. So again, thank you all for listening. I hope everybody's having a great week. And remember, Vertigo, the podcast that will make your head spin.